If beautiful, powerful liturgies are important to you, you've come to the right place. I'll be right back. Howdy there, Gracious Gang. It's Mike Creevy, host of the Gracious Guest Show, where we are all hopefully trying to be, or at least interested in being, a little bit more gracious in our stay here in this earthly life. And part of that means coming to a better appreciation of the world around us, the way God has made things, what God is about, and how he is communicating with us in various ways, but most of all through his son, through his church. So if you haven't been to this channel before, please make sure that you like and subscribe to this and share this video far and wide, especially with someone who wants to go a little bit deeper, in this case today, into an understanding of the liturgy. It's funny, I stumbled upon an old friend without really looking him up on purpose, but Father Brandon Macadaeg, through just a search I was doing about the liturgy a few weeks ago, and it turns out he is a board member for the Benedict XVI Institute, which you're definitely going to want to check out below. I've got a lot of links below you'll want to see. Father Brandon is the rector, actually, of the cathedral in Oakland, California. I have his bio here. He was appointed as the fourth rector of the Cathedral of Christ the Light in Oakland on July 1st, 2019 by Bishop Michael Barber. He's originally from San Francisco, raised in the East Bay, so he's back home, broadly speaking. We met at Catholic University, where he was an undergrad at the same time I was, and then he entered into discernment and ultimately the seminary and the priesthood. He studied at the Pontifical North American College in Rome, where he obtained his Bachelor's of Sacred Theology from the Pontifical Gregorian University. He was ordained a deacon at St. Peter's Basilica on October 4th, 2012, and ordained to the priesthood in May of 2013. And so Father Brandon has a wealth of experience in his own life, the draw and the beauty of the liturgy and the effect it's had on him. And then especially you'll really appreciate, I think, his take and his really his vision and his understanding of what really the liturgy is and what's going on, what should be going on at each liturgy, both for those participating from the clergy side, so to speak, right, and then those of us in the pews, the lay faithful. So there's a really rich conversation that he and I entered into here, I think, on liturgy, all things liturgy, the importance of reverence, and ultimately being aware and increasingly aware of what it is that we're doing and partaking in every time we attend the sacred liturgy. So without further ado, let's jump right into my chat with Father Brandon in the Diocese of Oakland talking about liturgy. Check it out. Wonderful. Father Brandon, thank you so much for coming on this Gracious Guest Show with me here today.
Absolutely. It's great to be with you, Mike. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, and it's fun. I shared a little bit at the beginning, but I didn't spoil it for anyone that's watching this far so far here. The background here was funny as I was talking to you before we recorded, that I was looking over, I don't even remember why, but I was looking over websites, documentation, different things about sacred art, sacred literature, or sacred architecture rather, liturgy, and I stumbled upon the Benedict XVI Institute, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but saw your face there on the list of board members, and I sort of froze because I instantly was like, I know him. I can't remember if it's seminary or if it's college, and so then I narrowed it down to back from the CUA days. So what have you been doing for the last 18 years or 20 years or so? Just
Yeah,
tell our
absolutely.
guests a little bit about who you are, your background here.
Absolutely. It's again great to reconnect with you. When you had sent me the invitation, I said, "Who are you again?"
Right.
And your name sounds familiar, but I couldn't place the face. But when you mentioned CUA, I was like, "Oh yes, the wonderful days at CUA."
Yeah.
So since we last spoke to each other and last saw each other, I finished at CUA in 2008, and then I stayed along for the licentiate in philosophy in 2009. I was a seminarian at the time in those years. And then after that, I was sent to Rome, to the North American College, an extraordinary experience over there, studied at the Gregorian University. And then in 2013, I was ordained to the priesthood here in the Diocese of Oakland. And after that time, my entire 11 years as a priest has been in parish work. I had a large suburban parish when I first got ordained, and then I've been here in the city of Oakland at my first pastorate. And then for the last 5 years, I've been the rector of the Cathedral of Christ the Light. It's been a phenomenal experience here. Interestingly, I came at the cathedral at a time when the world was shut down in the pandemic,
Sure.
but we were able to rebuild into something that's very attractive and beautiful, and it's been a joy to lead this community.
That's wonderful. And I mean, I don't know when someone will be watching this. Things change sometimes, but I believe at the time of this recording, is it Bishop Barber? Is that correct? Bishop in
Yes, that's
Oakland?
great.
Okay.
Bishop Michael Barber.
Because that was another funny random connection. I was on a seminarian retreat back in like 2009, and it was hosted by a bunch of Jesuits at the
Sure.
the seminary out there in Menlo Park. Is it
Oh,
St. Patrick? I
St.
think out
Patrick's,
there.
yes.
Yeah. So that's, and I went to confession with him and chatted with him quite a bit. And then later on, I'm like, oh, I know that. It's like, I know that guy. He's the bishop now in Oakland. So yeah, the Catholic Church really is a small world, right? Even though a billion strong, it's, you never know who you're going to bump
It
into.
really is. It's a small world.
Yeah.
Very much like a family in some ways.
Yeah.
Actually, we should be a family. So 'cause we
Right.
are brothers and sisters in Christ. So that's
Well,
right.
this is a wonderful opportunity to talk specifically here about the liturgy, and I mean, there's so much we could go into, and so much all the different layers of it. But
Mhm.
it stands to reason that an awful lot of people probably
Sure.
watching this have some concept, or they've heard that word before. I mean, just if you're giving sort of an elevator pitch, for lack of a better term, to somebody, have in a brief synopsis of what are we really getting at, as Catholics when we talk about the word liturgy, or the concept of liturgy, what it really is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we use big words in the church that we don't really understand sometimes. So people say liturgy, and everyone's like, "What's that?" Oh,
Yeah.
it's the work of the people. Yes, but really, it's the work of God in us. And what's very helpful for me in understanding the liturgy is that what's being made present, and that is the Paschal mystery, the passion, death, resurrection of Jesus. Jesus, who on that hill called Calvary, on that Friday called Good, rescued our race from the powers of sin and death and hell and Satan. And so when we go to Mass, when we go to the liturgy, we are those events are being made present to us, and we participated in a very beautiful, beautiful, powerful, and very real way. Ultimately, it's a participation in the work of God's rescue project
Yeah.
to save us. And so it's more than just doing ceremony, and more than just doing, this pageantry. If I use
Mm-hmm.
that word, this is God's work, and it's Him who loved us first. And this is
Sure.
our response to that in word and in gesture and music and art. So in that regard,
Sure.
it's our participation, or
I
our
almost
work.
I almost wonder if there's if we have to do a better job, maybe in every area, of our catechesis and evangelization, to try to show that there's some similarity. I think of, for example, like cultural or sort of civic, holidays and events and things that we memorialize, right? Like 4th of July is coming up here at the time of this recording, or
Mhm.
I live not far from Gettysburg, and they have reenactments there all the time, right, for
Sure.
the battle. And I wonder sometimes if it's not too easy for us to slip into this idea that, well, we're kind of, just trying to preserve the memory of an important event that happened a long time ago, that has something to do with, or at least something vaguely to do with, something I'm still doing now, like a family tradition. And not to downplay those have their role, and they can, I think, in a sense, continue to kind of create culture and further culture. But
Mhm.
maybe speak a little bit more to that the reality of, it's not just I can ask it this way, not just a memorial, but a remembrance, and the theological difference there of making this present, this one event
Right.
present that we are participating in. Maybe explore that a
Yeah,
little
I
bit more.
mean, you mentioned Gettysburg and the reenactments. So we could do all kinds of reenactments of things. Here at the Liturgy, we're not play acting. This
Hmm.
isn't just like, oh, we're doing this, and it's a nice thought of something that happened before, and we get to feel that. I mean, this stuff is real. It's what God is doing, and He's still doing in us. And so I remember back at our CUA days when it was a class with Monsignor Sokolowski. It was a philosophy
Hmm.
class, but he went through this sort of phenomenological sort of approach to talking about what happens at the liturgy and how it all becomes one. Anyways, I just remember a visible image where he says this is taking place. What happened on Calvary, what happened at the upper room, what we're doing here in Saint So-and-so Church. this is, well, in time, it also is happening in eternity as well. And
Yeah.
it's outside of time. It's stepping into the timeless, it's stepping into the presence of God. And God, who invited us to himself, is choosing to share with us in this way and in this time and in this place. And we participate with him in heaven. So it's even at
Yeah.
an elevated way from just a battlefield reenactment and
Right.
so forth. And I think, just to make this even more tangible, what really has informed my own prayer and my own approach in the celebration of the liturgy is understanding Luke chapter 15, and say that's I believe the story of the prodigal son.
Mm-hmm.
And we read that story as the prodigal son, he comes back, but I also like to read it in terms of the return of the victorious son. And I'm
Hmm.
not talking about the son, the sinner, but the son, the son, Jesus
Yeah.
Christ. And what's happening here is he's making a return to his Father.
Wow.
Jesus, who came to rescue us. God was faithful to us the day that our race fell into sin, that we said that God isn't a good father. And the Son embarked on this amazing mission to step in our world, our darkened world that was doomed. I think the book of Wisdom speaks of
Yeah.
that imagery. And what happens is that he's returning to his Father. There's an ascent, there's an ascension that happens. And we see the Father who is rich in mercy, the Father who lavishes his Son, putting a robe and a ring on his finger. And what the Father sees is the return of his victorious Son, but with him is us, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's the Son who was lost. We're returning with the victorious Son, Jesus Christ. And we're
Yeah.
given that place. We are lavish. We're loved. We're invited to somewhere, to a place beyond what our race was destined for.
Yeah.
We are promised the joy of heaven, and this is our participation in that. And so I always found that just very helpful
Sure.
to think about. And at every Mass, we're making that return to our Father. And if that is not the case, well, then turn over and hit the snooze button on your phone, on your alarm clock, and go back to bed.
Yeah.
Because other than that, this is nothing more than just a reenactment or a nice
Yeah.
ritual, but it's more than that.
Yeah. And I wonder, it's interesting because uh, my wife and I were blessed to get to go to a couple through a friend of ours, a mutual friend, one of her bridesmaids, and a college friend of hers or from her grad program invited us a few times to an actual Passover Seder. So she's Jewish, her family. And there was one we attended, up near Penn State, when they were students. Then another one we were invited to attend with her family, actually at their home in Virginia. And so, being to not just as great as they are, the sort of Christian, you know, teaching seders that they do sometimes, like this is what a Jewish Passover Seder is like, which is very beneficial. To actually be at a real one,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and it's funny, like my wife kept like smacking me because I kept being like I'd lean over, we have the little guide as we're going through it and everything. I'm like, that's like this thing in the Mass. She's like, you have to stop it. She's like, yes, you have to. And what really blew my mind and jumped out at me the very first time I went to one was, the way that the language throughout it reflects this sort of theological idea that we are somehow right now by God's power, we are actually joining in that event,
Mm-hmm.
from thousands of years ago, and how even some of the language in it, some of the spoken parts are in the present tense,
Right.
as if we are there now.
Right.
And I really like that idea really hit me and the more I've read about some of the Jewish roots of the Eucharist
Mm-hmm.
and the liturgy. And so that's something I try to, bring in to the extent I can with my students.
Yeah.
How do you see, just even in I'm just curious, like in your own, because many people may not know this, um, your own preparation, for Mass. I know there's certain rituals a lot of people don't see, right? As priests are vesting, as they're preparing for Mass, as you're going through the Mass. What are, maybe one or two of the things that really jump out at you, or that you try to remain sort of, appreciative of when it's so easy to go through the motions with everything in life, what do you try to kind of anchor yourself in the celebration of the Mass?
Sure, that's a great question, and I think it speaks to the heart of a good preparation. For me as a celebrant, I don't like rushing into Mass, because it's not just something I have to do to get done. I mean, this is
Right.
where I'm there and I'm in the presence of the Lord, and I'm receiving from Him all the graces He's pouring out. So I want to be properly disposed to that. So, of course, being in that city of grace, going to confession, I'm blessed here at the cathedral because we have confessions before Mass all the time. And I
Mm-hmm.
even participate in being the one to receive the sacrament as well.
Sure.
So that's always a helpful thing to do. But also just really getting the sense of quiet, like understanding what's happening here. I'm stepping out of time and into eternity. I'm stepping into the presence of Christ. I'm there at Calvary. I'm there at that tomb where He calls me by name. And
Yeah.
so it really takes, for at least me, a lot of concentration and preparation. So what I always do is, as I remind myself of the gospel, like what He is doing,
Mm.
because we know that the gospel is power. And John Paul II, I think, once said, the ardent proclamation of the gospel has the
Mm.
power to overwhelm someone to make that act of faith in Jesus. And
Yeah.
I am embracing my vocation to be a priest every single day. And that certainly happens at that moment. And so understanding what I'm doing, making sure that the lens by which I see my worldview really is the gospel of what Jesus has done. And then
And
also, there's a whole preparation of getting vested
yeah.
for Mass that priests do. And there are prayers that accompany it, the Amice, the Alb, the Cincture, and then the Stolen Chasuble. And I very much pray those prayers very intently, um, and reminding myself that ultimately I have to disappear.
Mm.
Like, I have to disappear when
Yeah.
because it's not me who's doing this. It's the Lord, and I'm standing there in His person, Christ the head, to offer this
Sure.
wonderful and amazing sacrifice of which I am not worthy,
Mm.
but He has set me apart for. And that is such a powerful and beautiful call, and it's one that requires me as the pre-celebrant to be very intentional, but also to approach it with a tremendous reverence
Yes.
and respect. So that's sort of the ways that I
Yeah.
and then of course preparing the homily and doing all that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
just at least getting focused is good.
Right. Well, and kind of to dovetail off that, because you mentioned reverence, which was something I had right down here I wanted to kind of bring up to explore in a couple ways.
Sure.
Because for one sense, we could definitely say that, like you were talking earlier when we were discussing earlier, I think before we were recording about the importance of recognizing that we do all have a role, or we have a part. I don't want to play, basically, for lack of a better term. We have our role in this. Um, but that doesn't necessarily mean it all is going to look exactly the same way. So for example, I read at some point, I couldn't find the reference before we started, that Pope Benedict, I think, had a breakdown somewhere that he wrote that was sort of pushing back a little bit about a way in the wake of the Second Vatican Council with Sacrosanctum Concilium on the Divine Liturgy, that
Mm-hmm.
notion of the full and active participation in the English translation, that he was, I don't know the Latin word, but I read somewhere that he was basically pushing back and saying active not so much as actual, and
Mm-hmm.
making a distinction between, when you say active in English, we all kind of think it means you have to be doing
Doing
something,
something. Mm-hmm.
or busy, or everyone, you got to have, not, I'm not trying to pick on anyone particular, just some examples we've all seen everything from banners to different gestures, to like, these people are going to stand over here, this person's going to do that, this person's going to bring this forward,
Mm-hmm.
and just it can become a very busybody kind of thing, I think,
Sure.
with best intentions. But maybe just to kind of open with that a little bit in a broader conversation about reverence, how do you see sort of this balance between an actively participating laity, not necessarily meaning that every one of us has to be fidgeting or doing something
Exactly.
specifically, during the like stage directions or something, right, during Mass?
Sure. Sure. Yeah, that's one of the principles I've been thinking about in the parish that I'm at. this extraordinary parish that I lead. And one of the principles by which we live, we say this: it's not enough to just be a staff. And of course, that's talking about to the people that I work with and so forth. But I would also apply that to everybody who comes here, who's members of this family, this community. That it's not just enough to be a volunteer. You're not just in church. You're not just something. Nobody says you're just the pastor. I'm just the businessman. You're just the guy on YouTube.
Right.
We need each other. Everybody has a role to play, and it's not just functional, but it's there to build up the body of Christ. So this image St. Paul uses very much of a body is essential. So how do we apply that then, therefore, to the worshiping community? Now, there are people that are going to do stuff. The priest, the deacons, the sacristan, the altar servers, the lector. We don't use extraordinary ministers here. Cathedrals have so many clergy, but everyone's doing something. And there was that mindset. I mean, we grew up with that. You have to do something, you have to participate. But that's just limiting everyone to simply function. Now, what's making the return to the Lord at the sacred liturgy? It's the body of Christ, with Christ Jesus himself as the head, of which we are members. And so just thinking about that is very helpful. So now, in the practical sense, for those who are actually doing something, there's a really intentional preparation. And I'll use the example of our altar servers here at the cathedral. We have a team of both adult men and teenage young men who are our altar servers. I don't run that ministry at all. I've only just laid out some principles and just sort of showed, here's how we do things. But here's what they've done. They come in, they rehearse, they figure out what they're supposed to do, but then they spend together 20 minutes before the Blessed Sacrament.
Wow.
In prayer. And they're not praying like, God, help me to play well at my next basketball game, or, help me to do well at work. I mean, they're intentionally asking, Lord, what is it that you are calling me to today to do or to be for you? And it's amazing to see them not only just like visibly praying before the Blessed Sacrament, but then they're actually talking about what they heard in prayer. Yeah. And they're able to bring that and worship the Lord that way. Yes, they're doing actions. They're carrying a towel or carrying the cross or carrying the candles or something. But they're bringing the entirety of themselves here to and I just always found that very powerful, because when you watch them, you're like, okay, these guys are on a higher plane. It's amazing. They're not just doing this, and they don't do it even to be seen. It's like, this is how they're making it a return to the Lord. And then at the end of Mass, there's this great prayer of thanksgiving that they do, and they encourage each other on the way, and then they go about the day. That has been caught, that culture has been caught by those who are attending the Mass. And they're seeing the intensity of the preparation of this group of people, where it's actually inspiring members in my community to actually break open the Word all week. They're reading the readings. They have the readings with them. They're listening. They're predisposed to receive what is happening and what's being poured out for them at this particular Mass. There's a sense of quiet, of centering oneself, of being in the Lord's presence that I'm beginning to see here in this community. And then when it comes to the actual moment that Mass starts, there's a vibrancy to it, not just because everyone's functionally doing something, but I think it's because they went in there with their entire heart. You sense this is real worship. This is a real worship of not a whole bunch of people doing the like stuff, but it's people who are worshiping Almighty God, communion, in a powerful way. So I don't know if that speaks to it, but it just shares just sort of a tangible example of how we could rediscover that participation, less about function and more about laying my heart here before the Lord who loves me.
That's so powerful, because it's such a there's such an opportunity, I think, is sometimes missed here. Like, and I see this with some of our school liturgies sometimes where,
Hmm.
and, granted, you've got a pretty wide array, at least at my school at schools I've been at, a wide array of people in
Hmm.
attendance, mostly Catholic, but a growing percentage of non-Catholic students who in some cases have just no concept of what is happening here, and
Right.
so we have to do a better job of kind of institutionally, doing as much as we can, kind of remedial training, if nothing else, for folks completely unaccustomed to it, in that context of our school context, of at least
Hmm.
making them aware. But, when it comes to uh, just anybody attending mass, any Catholic attending mass, there's so many things we could look at, from the way you dress to the sort of the liturgy, almost you could say, of what you do when you come in, and
Yeah.
holy water and genuflecting, and to teach why we do these things. But just to select one that came to mind, um, and I know there's a debate about, how people dress and different cultural changes and stuff like that. But just a quick fun anecdote. I really learned this, oddly enough, more through a snow day situation than through mass. We had the very first like kind of virtual day when that was becoming a thing.
Hmm.
Like, oh, all this snow, and now we're going to have a virtual day. And I still had to teach. The kids were supposed to do some homework and everything. And I just stayed in my like pajama pants and like got a coffee, and like my wife went on campus to do something. This was back when we first married, and I had this whole plan. I was like, this is great. I'm home. I can get all these other things done. I don't have my regular teaching slate. And like, it's like I blinked and it was like 3 PM. I had done nothing, and it just disappeared. And the next day, I don't know what made me do it. We had another snow day the next day. And I promise I'm going somewhere with this. And I got up the next day. I don't know why I thought to do it. I was just so disappointed on how the day before had gone, and I didn't want to waste it.
Hmm.
Uh, that I got up, I got ready like normal, I got dressed like normal for work. I'm home by myself in dress pants and a shirt and tie.
Hmm.
It seemed silly, but I just thought I'd try it. It was one of the most productive days of my entire life. And I'm not saying that mass is about being productive, but I do think, taking into account those differences of maybe cultural differences and that sort of thing. Um, I do think there's something to be said for what we as the laity, um, the mindset we put ourselves into
Hmm.
based on our own preparation, from dress to, like you said, when we show up. Uh, if we're sitting there, chatting with our neighbor, or like the moment the recessional hymn is over, we start yucking it up.
Yeah.
Are we missing opportunities here to really be intentional, in our participation? So that's not this constant activity, but my participation is very intentional in this drama unfolding. So I don't know
Yeah.
if there was a question there, but that was more
No.
of a long-winded kind of way of just getting at that. Yet another thing that's we're not at a show. We're not there to show up and watch, a performance take place, and there
Mhm.
is something sacred happening here.
Absolutely, absolutely, and we have to uphold the sacred, the holy. And here, when I got here at the cathedral, I did something that they tell every pastor never do. Don't make any big changes.
Oh,
Because
okay. Yeah.
you wait a year and watch it out. And yeah, that's nice advice. If we're a company or something.
Yeah.
But I made a significant change, and it upset some people initially, but it was a good change. I reduced the number of masses at the cathedral to basically one in each language. So one Vietnamese mass, one English mass, which is a solemn high mass, if you
Oh,
will,
okay.
and then one Spanish mass, which is also solemn as
Mm-hmm.
well. And we were in the mindset before of like, well, we have to have a lot of masses, because
Mm-hmm.
make it convenient for people. And there's this mindset of like get in, get out kind of thing. It's like going
Yeah.
to, Mass Express. And I remember
Right.
even our days at COA, one of the
Yeah.
churches nearby, they had mass at 7, 7:30, 8, 8:30, and it was like boom,
Yeah.
boom, 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 boom. You go, and there was a push for a lot of people that says, "Oh, you should just have more mass." I said, "No, we're going to reduce it to one,
Hmm.
and we're going to be very intentional about this is where we are on Sunday morning, because really, ultimately, what is more important
Hmm.
on Sunday morning?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't need to go to soccer. You don't need to go to the grocery store. You don't save Sunday to do errands. That's why you have Saturday,
Right. Right.
That's the day to do that. But Sunday, it's the day that we rest with the Lord.
Yeah.
See, on the Sabbath day, the Lord rested and rejoiced in his creation. So
Mm.
there's this sense of when we come to Mass here at the cathedral, we use this a lot. We're wasting time with the Lord and with each
Yes.
other. Like that's what a family does. You waste time with
Yeah.
each other.
That's that
And,
Romano Guardini, the liturgy as play, I think, where he talks about
Mhm.
that, the uselessness. It's not a it's an end in itself. It's not something. It's not utilitarian.
Exactly, exactly. And so here, what I found is that people, while they're intentional in their preparation, they actually want to stay and they want the full feast.
Mm.
And and I see this.
Wow.
We're a very diverse community here.
Hmm.
We It really looks like the Bay Area here. It's everybody, and it's
Yeah.
quite beautiful. And even though we have a lot of Filipinos, Africans, and Latinos, I can speak as someone who's a Filipino American. What we wear, it matters.
Mhm.
Uniforms matter. I remember going to the
Yeah.
Philippines, everybody has like a coat on, or there's a, you get a medal or something. It's
Yeah.
like it means something
Yeah.
because you're part of something that's just so it's much bigger,
Yeah.
and it's powerful and it's good. And I think that mindset is certainly very helpful for us Americans, of seeing that like I don't dress up to go to church to show off. That's prideful and that's
Right.
wrong and that has no place. But I'm doing this because this is how I'm making my return to the Lord, but
Hmm.
also recognizing my identity of how he sees me. There's
Yeah.
someone that was very beautiful. They said, if the Lord lavished me by putting on a coat and a ring and sandals on my feet, in reference
Hmm.
to the story of the prodigal son, how much more should I take those gifts? And that's sometimes it's not like physical, it's not material, but how much more should I return to him with those gifts?
Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
I feel like it's even just at the core of that. It's not about just the clothes. It's about the whole concept of holiness and the sacred, right? Of something being set aside. Like a friend of mine from the South who's got his Sunday boots.
Hmm.
Like even something like that. It's like, no, I don't wear those to go cutting, logs. Those are my Sunday boots,
Right.
And I just feel like there is that sense of sacred space, that carries over into, vestments, into music, of
Yeah.
course.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
if I go there at Mass, yeah, well, you might cringe at this. I won't say where it was. It wasn't in your diocese or the one I'm in now. But we were at a Mass once where the recessional hymn, it wasn't even them playing it. I mean, musicians in the parish playing it. It was a, push play on Spotify kind of thing through the speakers of the church. The recessional hymn was Three Little Birds by Bob Marley,
Oh,
which, hey, listen, I love that song with like a beer on the beach or something. It's
sure.
not for Mass. Like
Right.
it's just, and so, some people like, might get in a debate about what is for Mass, what isn't. But I feel like it's important for us to not budge on affirming that there has to be a line. Like there is something in here, right? That is a line of demarcation between, an earth focused, right, like this life focused sort of experience versus something that's meant to, transcend. um and I don't know if that's a good segue to maybe ask you a little bit about the Mass from the Americas as an example.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
um because I wasn't too, I hadn't followed that too much. I'd heard about it at the time, but why don't you just walk us through a little bit, kind of your role here at it was the one in New York,
New
correct?
York.
St.
Yeah.
Patrick's, yeah. Okay.
Mhm. Yeah, the Mass of the Americas. That was composed by a wonderful composer, Frank LaRocca, who's from this area out here in California. And this Mass was commissioned for two feasts: one, the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and the Feast of the Solemnity of the Immaculate Conception. And
Hmm.
so he was able to bring in some of the Mexican folk music that would very much be sung around the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, but then also with the beautiful musical tradition of the church in celebration of the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. And so, anyways, this Mass was composed, and I can't speak about the musicality of it because I'm not a musician, but the Mass that you're referring to was a Mass in New York City. We did it at Old St. Patrick's Cathedral.
Hmm.
Um, And it was in 2022. It was January. Going to New York City in January. I don't know why. You talk about snow day. I don't even know what that is. But being out here, never.
I have the DC, the National Shrine and DC version of it
Sure,
linked
which was
below
an
for them to
extraordinary
see
form.
too. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so my participation at that mass in New York, I was the master of ceremonies. The Archbishop of San Francisco, Archbishop Corleone, was the celebrant of that mass, and we had the choir and all the instruments for that mass. There were vestments that were commissioned that the Archbishop had brought over from San Francisco that we used. We had local altar servers that we were able to train. The Archbishop wanted to do a vesting before the
Mm-hmm.
Mass where people could see that preparation that went along with some of the music. And the Mass was at Orientum.
Mm-hmm.
And it was beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, like, when I reflect on that Mass, it was as if all time stopped.
Yeah.
Yeah. I forgot I was in the middle of New York City for a couple hours,
Yeah.
and there was a timelessness to it in such that it could have been anywhere. I could have been in a great cathedral in France. I could have been
any
back home.
time.
Yeah.
It could have been 1,000 years ago.
Right.
It's amazing.
But we were in the presence of Almighty God.
Yeah.
And we had a taste of heaven there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that was one of the, we're a couple years out now, but it was such a powerful reminder of what beauty can bring. And when we do the liturgy well, when everyone does their part, when they're prepared well, when it's prayed well, all of that taken together, it really, then you see the work of Almighty God. This just came across my mind now as we were speaking about this. I was this past week with a family, and this is a group of people who are really seeking to renew the church. They're out in Detroit, Michigan. Leaders Father John Ricardo, the Acts 29, which I'm very much part of here. And one of the teammates I was with commented on how their office was so beautiful and everything was very intentional. Everything was in the right place. And one of my teammates had commented, well, isn't that how it is with God? If God is really the one who put this all together, there's going to be a beauty and an order to all of this. Yeah. And I thought of that and just applying it to this liturgy, the Mass of the Americas that we did in New York. It was so well, I wouldn't say choreographed, I don't want to say that, but there was an organization and an order rather to it that it directs you to God. Like, this is what God has done, and He's allowed us to participate in this, and experiencing that order and that beauty and the goodness that was there and the truth that was preached and shared. Then you're like, this is who He is. Yeah, this is who He is, and I want that, not just for, and I don't want a foretaste. I don't want a sample. I want this forever. Yeah, and that is what's promised to us. And I remember just seeing the Archbishop, who was my bishop here in Oakland, once, and he was in tears. He was moved by it, and I think that happened. And he wasn't moved like, oh wow, we did something. It's wow, like God in His goodness is still revealing Himself to His people here and now in the midst of this huge city, in the midst of this world that we live in, which can be chaotic, or it is chaotic. But God's there, and I think not only did it give a sense of refuge, a peace for us, it also prompted us to go back. Like, I went back to California after that because I got on the flight like literally after that Mass to come home because I had Mass here. I work here. I felt home convicted, and renewed to continue my work of building up God's kingdom in the little area that I'm called to. So that's sort of the Mass of the Americas in a broader sense of it, and why the work of the Benedict XVI Institute is such a gift to our time, because we're not only our colleagues here in the Institute aren't just composing and doing things that are nice and pretty. It's really getting us in touch with God.
Well, it might be some speculation on my part here, but I look around and I just see like there's something that seems to be happening precisely at this time where there is so much, darkness and so many people feel hopeless, and there's this, huge drift into complete like self-centered casual living, right, with no
Yeah.
nothing higher. And there is this, I feel like, it's a question of like, well, is what we believe true or not? Because if it's true, the ship's gonna, I mean, it won't take care of itself, right? It's all in the Lord's hands. But like,
Hmm.
are we actually beings made in God's image and likeness or not? And if we are, I just think like you can't go too long in the grand scheme of things without there being, this desire just bursting out, right? To raise things back up or to yearn for something greater. And so I see it in like the education world. Like there's
Sure.
this massive swing. The real interest in things like classical education, focusing more on virtue and character than job
Yeah.
placement, this kind of
Mhm.
thing. Um, and even in like like classical music revival,
Mhm.
Morton Lauridsen comes to mind. He came out with that masterful O Magnum Mysterium a couple years back. That's
Mhm.
been done a bunch of times, and that's a song where, and I'll link as much of this as I can remember
Right.
below. But things like that, just that particular piece jumped on my mind because that's an example of it's not just a retreat to the good old days necessarily.
Right.
There is something kind of new and organic about it. There's some tonality in some of the music that might have a little more like dissonance in it that maybe was the case hundreds of years ago, but it's not poppy.
Right.
It's like there's like this organic growth to it. And so
Right.
I do think there's a way in the liturgy, I imagine, to make room for, like you said, in the Mass of the Americas specifically with I just lost his name, the composer again.
Oh, Frank LaRocca.
Frank, yeah, for Frank LaRocca, because I saw an interview with him where he was just saying that he had felt inspiration was the word he used. This idea that he didn't really attribute to just, you know, like a cool thing he came up with, but what if we have it in this, dialect, like that,
Mhm.
to
The
do this like
Nuahato.
an Ave Maria, right? Like in the
Right. Right. Right.
language that Mary spoke to Juan Diego and
Mhm.
Tepeyac. Like,
Yeah.
what an amazing,
Mhm.
idea. And so, yeah, I'm jumping around here, but
Yeah.
it does seem though. I guess what I'm saying is, it does seem like God knows what He's doing,
He does.
yes,
He does, and
and
he's
wants us to find Him, right?
exactly, and that's the beautiful thing. Like that Mass of the Americas has certainly deepened my love and devotion to our Blessed Mother.
Hmm.
Going to Catholic U, we had the shrine right next to us, and that was
Yeah,
such an inspiration in my own discernment. I mean, I heard my vocation there at the
yeah.
shrine. I heard just a very real call. But anyways, um, over the years, Mary has just played such an important role, and I've grown a lot in my confidence and trust in her. And in reflecting on the Mass of the Americas, I remember what struck out with me. It was like this wasn't a throwback to the good old days. It actually helped my understanding of knowing that I have a mother. I have
Hmm.
my mom, but I have
Hmm.
our Blessed Mother who is there guiding me, protecting, walking with, teaching me how to be a disciple. And just that sentiment of the tenderness of the mother, that was just so real and so palpable
Yeah.
that it invites you to make that act of faith. And I think that's been very true in the tradition of how we're restoring beauty. Here at the cathedral in Oakland at All Souls Day, we do the Fourier's Requiem, and we do it every year. It's become a tradition here. Bishop Barber introduced us some 10, 11 years ago when he became bishop, and it's well attended. We've also included in it now, we bury the remains of one of the forgotten homeless deceased. Here in
Hmm.
the city of Oakland, there's a lot. We have a cemetery under the cathedral, and so we're able to bury an unclaimed, or inter rather, an unclaimed cremain.
Wow.
And so we do this powerful act of mercy.
Hmm.
Anyways, I was just thinking about Foray when he composed his Requiem, and he was saying something along the lines of that he wrote it after the death of his parents, but it also um, his understanding of death had changed. That what it wasn't like a wall that we hit,
Huh.
but a door by which we enter into eternity because of what
Yeah.
Christ has done.
Right.
And so he says, critics would call my Requiem a lullaby of death, basically, and he saw it as a death, not as, yes, it's an enemy, and death is bad, but it's also can be a friend, so to speak,
Hmm.
before the Christian.
Yeah.
And so that
Sister
development of
Death.
his,
It
yeah,
was
what's that?
for Saint Francis, right? Praised be you, O Sister Death.
Sister death, yeah.
Like
Yeah.
what? And I was
Yeah.
like, yeah,
And so
okay,
the
yeah.
sense is, I think, what we're seeing in our time, a beautiful time of which we are born into, and God is doing something powerful where all of art and beauty and music, coming together again, not as a throwback to the past, but as a way, as a gift to our time of opening us up to, above all, He who is beauty itself, and
Hmm.
truth itself, and goodness itself, He who is
Wonderful.
love, God. And yeah, I think in that regard, it's an exciting time
Sure.
for the church right now. Like,
Yeah.
um, I don't want to live in any other time but now.
Right.
Like, because God made us for this time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I just am so grateful that there are people who are bringing beauty, goodness, truth back, and it's
Hmm.
really inspiring. It's
Wonderful.
transformed a lot of people.
Well, Father Brandon, thank you so much for coming on today. We're gonna go end it there for now, but I'm sure we can find more to talk about in the future if you want to come
Yeah, I could
back.
keep
So
on going. So hope you have me back.
absolutely, I'd love to. Well, thank you so much, and God bless you.
Thank you, Mike, and God bless you, and prayers for you.
Thank you. Well, I'm really fired up after that. And we talked afterwards, and I mentioned to him I'm rereading this wonderful book right here, The Wellspring of Worship. I don't know if you can see that here. This is the Ignatius Press version by Father Jean Corbon, who was a French priest of the Greek Catholic Eparchy in Beirut. It's an Eastern Rite within the Catholic Church, and so he spent many years in Lebanon in Beirut, and became really renowned for his understanding of the liturgy and of prayer. And he helped actually to draft Part 4 of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which came out in the 1990s, the section on prayer. And this book, again, it's linked below. You definitely should check it out. His way of explaining and expressing the reality of really the cosmic, the eternal reality of what's going on in every liturgy. Again, like we said in the interview, far from being just some memorial of an event that happened a long time ago, right? As is often uh, put out there by maybe some friends of mine, sometimes some non-Catholic Christians who will say something like, well, you believe in the Eucharist, but Jesus just said, in as much as you remember me, or do this in as much as you remember me, do this whenever you remember me. That's not really what he's talking about when he talks about do this in memory of me. It's a very rich and deep sort of connection to the Paschal mystery, the Passover, the idea of the memorial being this endlessly rich, eternally charged reality of his sacrifice and death. That we partake of that one event every time we receive him physically, body, blood, soul, and divinity in the Eucharist. So there's more links below on that. But let me just share this just to kind of close here about the power of Christ over death. And this is just, I think, a beautiful way to kind of wrap up. This is on page 56 of Father Corbon's book. He's talking about the cross and the resurrection, the one event of that reality of Christ's victory. And he says, more than that, it is the only true event in all of history. All other events are dead and will always be dead. This one alone remains. Quote, Christ has been raised from the dead and will never die again. That's from Romans chapter 6, verse 9. He was not brought back to life in the manner of Lazarus or the daughter of Jairus or the son of the widow of Nain. These individuals began a mortal life once again and finally died for good. In the case of Christ and Him alone, rising meant passing through death and passing with the whole of His humanity beyond death. He pierced the wall of death and therefore the wall of mortal time. This coming of the word of life into our flesh and into the very abyss of our death alone deserves to be called an event. Because due to it, all the walls of death have collapsed and life has sprung up in their place. The hour of which the Word with a loud cry handed over his breath of love so that men might live is no longer in the past. It is. It abides. It lives on through history and sustains it. This unprecedented power that the river of life exercises in the humanity of the risen Christ, that is the liturgy. In it, all the promises of the Father find their fulfillment. Acts chapter 13, verse 32, it's referencing there. Since that moment, the communion of the Blessed Trinity has ceaselessly been spreading throughout our world and flooding over our time with its fullness. Henceforth, the economy of salvation takes the form of liturgy. So what is the liturgy? The liturgy is the ceaselessly playing out repercussions of and overflow of the glory, the majesty, the power of Christ's victory over death. Not just something your parents have, make you go to on Sunday. So let's all get a little more serious about the drama of what we're partaking in here. Get fired up, and remember that no matter what your mass that you attend at your local parish might look like, no matter the architecture of the building, the art, for better or for worse, the music, maybe the pastor's not the greatest homilist ever. That's not what it's about. And the more we can remember what it's really about, the more not only will we get out of Mass, but the more we will be able to truly align ourselves willingly in this very intentional participation in the beauty of the liturgy. So thank you so much for stopping by the Gracious Guest Show today. Make sure you check out my other content, subscribe, share this far and wide. Until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.